A gute Woche. The Rebbe Zalman began the Farbrengen today that we are now coming from the month of Tishrei. And more specific, the Yontif in the month which deals directly with Simcha. And that is the Yontif of Sukkot. Even though all of the Yomim Tovim are all Moyadim L'Simcha, every Yontif, however, nonetheless, we know that every Yontif has its inyan with what it excels in, what it stresses most. Pesach stresses the inyan of Zman Cheroseinu. Shavuos stresses the fact of Zman Matan Torah. Which of the Yomim Tovim stress the inyan of Simcha? It's expressed mostly in Sukkot. And Sukkot is Zman Simchoseinu. Bizman Shebeis HaMikdash Kayim, the Yontif of Sukkot lasted for 8 days. Now, in Goles, with the additional day of Yontif, it lasts for 9 days. And specifically this year, that right from Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, we went into Shabbos Bereishis. And Shabbos Bereishis is again an inyan of Simcha. As the Sefri says, on the Pasuk, Uv'yom Simchaschem, your days of happiness, your days of joy. So the Sefri interprets the Pasuk, Elu HaShabbos, that this has a shaykhs, this means Shabbos. In general, the Rebbe continued, all inyanim that happen in the month of Tishrei have a special shaykhs to the entire year. And that is why it is brought in Svarim that Tishrei has the same letters as the word Reishis, the beginning. If we were to spell Reishis without an Aleph, you would get Tishrei. Why? Because this is the beginning of the year, this is the head of the year, and this gives the koyach, this gives us the strength for the entire year to be able to go through the Avodas Hashem, serving the Rebishter during the entire year. We get the strength from it from the month of Tishrei. So where do we get the strength to serve the Rebishter with simcha, with happiness? This we get from Sukkot. So the happiness of Sukkot and Simchas Torah is carried out throughout the entire year and gives us the strength to serve the Rebishter with simcha during the entire year. Regarding the Sedra which we are in today, which is the Sedra of Lech Lecha, this Sedra was read today, and if we were to go to the end of Lech Lecha, which this is the parsha of today, the parsha of Shvi, which the parsha which is learned in the shiurim of Chitas and Shabbos, and we were to look at the end of the Sedra, what do we read about? The fact that Avram was circumcised, the inyan of Milah. And the inyan of Milah is bifsarchem, as the pasuk uses the expression. This is something which is not a bypassing thing. It's something which remains eternally in the person's body. And the inyan of Milah also has to do with Simcha. As we find, the Gemara interprets the pasuk that David HaMelech said, Sos onoichi alim rasecha ki moitzei sholol harav. David HaMelech said that I am happy, I am joyous with your mitzvahs, just like a person who found a very huge treasure. So we see how he stresses the mitzvah of Milah, how it has to do with Simcha. Though, in halacha we find question is discussed regarding a bris, whether to make the bracha of Shechayanu or not. And the reason why not to make the Shechayanu is because, as the Shulchan Aruch uses the expression, Tzaro diyanuka, there is pain involved, the pain of the infant, the pain of the child, and for this reason, not to make a Shechayanu. But at the same time we find, by a bris, what do we say by a bris? In the text of the Tefillah, what we say by a bris, it's expressed Simcha. Loshen goes Togel ha, meaning of joy. So again we find, even though a Shechayonu is not recited al pi halacha, why? Because of tzara diyanuka, because there is pain involved. However, the general idea of the mitzvah of Milah brings about an inyan of simcha. As we stress it right away at the bris, Yismach ha'av, let the father and mother, let them both be happy. An inyan of simcha. Especially the Rebbe added on, there's a stress for simcha in Parshas Lech Lecha. When we are talking in Lech Lecha, there is mention of the Keini Knizi Vikadmoini. It's brought in Svarim. Chassidus stresses it, that when the Yidden took over Eretz Yisrael, the Yidden took over Eretz Canaan, what did they take over? They took over a land of 7 nations. However, lo osid love, when Mashiach will come, the Rebishter will not only give us a land of 7 nations, the Rebishter will give us a land of 10 nations. Also adding on Keini Knizi Vikadmoini, which this is also a stress for the inyan of Simcha in this week's Seder. Mamela, we see how important and great the inyan of Simcha is. How does a person express Simcha? So Rabbi continued, Simcha is expressed when a person sings and claps with his hands and he dances. Though when he dances he starts with his feet, however his feet pick up the entire body. So not only is it an elevation for his feet, it's an elevation for the entire body. And here the Rebbe brought the Rambam. It's a famous Rambam where the Rambam describes the great joy that David HaMelech expressed Simcha when he was dancing in front of the Aron Hashem, in front of the Or. And we're talking about a person like David HaMelech. And as the Rambam uses the expression, he was mefazes or mecharker, he clapped and he really went out of himself in the way of Simcha in front of the Aron Hashem. Because when a person like David HaMelech was dancing, so by him dancing and uplifting his body, not even the keser, even the crown that was on his head was also uplifted. So we see that when a person expresses an inyan of simcha and he dances with his entire body, it affects the entire body, that everything that is part of him is uplifted and elevated. Mamela, the Rebbe again concluded and stressed the great importance of simcha, and especially when simcha is expressed through singing and clapping with the hands and with dancing. And immediately after the Rebbe finished these words, finished this Sikha, the Rebbe began singing the famous Hakafis Nigun from his father, and the Rebbe got up and he danced in an extremely extraordinary way, expressing the inyan of Simcha. Being that in this Sikha, the Rebbe mentioned the inyan of Milah, and the expression of David HaMelech, that David HaMelech said, regarding mitzvahs milah, sos onoichi alim rasecha kemoitzei sholol rov, that he's so happy on the mitzvah, and he was referring to mitzvahs milah, just like one who finds a very big treasure, a very big oitzer. So the Rebbe referred to the Gemara. There's a Gemara that discusses David HaMelech and tells us that when did David HaMelech, what led David HaMelech to make this statement? That David HaMelech once entered a merchatz. Merchatz would mean he went into to wash himself. And the Gemara says, Kivan sheroa atzmoi orum, when he realized that he's naked, bothered him, he was naked from mitzvahs. But as soon as he reminded himself that he's gemalt, that he's circumcised, so he expressed himself, he's happy that he has this mitzvah of milah, which is part of him, and that is constantly with him. Rabbi asked a very strong question on this. There's a famous writing from the Sefer HaChinuch. The Chinuch writes in the Hakdam, in the introduction to his Sefer, where he explains that there are 6 mitzvahs, 6 mitzvahs that are tmidiyos, constant mitzvahs. And under all times and circumstances, a person is obligated to fulfill all of these 6 mitzvahs. And he explains the Chinuch. Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, love of the Eibishter, fear of the Eibishter, Emunah b'Hashem, believing in the Eibishter. These mitzvahs, day, night, Shabbos, Yontif, there's no limitation. At all times, a person is mechuyev in all of these mitzvahs. So Mamela, the Rebbe is asking, what is the Pshat in Gemara? That David HaMelech realized that he's naked from mitzvahs. Mamela, it started to bother him. until he realized that he's gemalt. A Yid has these mitzvahs always with him. Especially we're talking about a mitzvah like Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. The Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya that Ava is the Yesoid, the basis for all of the mitzvahs of mitzvahs Asay. Yira is the basis and the fundament of all the mitzvahs of Lois Asay. So nobody ever can part from Ava and Yira. Even the Beis HaMerchetz, which is a place where we don't learn in a Merchetz, but still at the same time a person is durchgenommen, his body is penetrated with the fact that he's constantly committed to these mitzvahs. So what's the pshat in the Gemara? That when David HaMelech was in the Beis HaMerchetz, he realized that he's orum in mitzvahs, he's naked from mitzvahs. So the Rebbe is learning, what is the meaning? In David HaMelech's Ro'a atzmei orum in ha-mitzvahs, he was looking for a mitzvah begashmius. A gashmiistic mitzvah. A mitzvah which is a material mitzvah. Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. This is spiritual in Yonim. A person, it's not tangible. A person cannot pinpoint to Av or to Yira. Most mitzvahs, however, are expressed through Gashmias. When David HaMelech was looking for a mitzvah, as the pasuk uses the expression here, which the Rebbe kept on stressing, bifsarchem, something which remains eternally in the body, in the basar hagashmi. What's the pshat? When he reminded himself on the mitzvah of Mila, he was happy. When was his mitzvah done, the bris done? This was done when he was a child of 8 days. Here we're talking about David HaMelech in the position of an adult. So here the Rebbe brought in, introduced the concept of a pe'ula nimsheches, which means there are certain acts in halacha, an act in halacha which is not only effective in the time when it takes place, but it pe'ula nimsheches, meaning it's something which this act, this deed is extended constantly. In fact, previous Farbrengen, the Rebbe also explained this inyan, lagabe the mitzvah of Mila. And there the Rebbe brought it out. There is the mitzvah, the physical circumcising the child. This is done on the 8th day. However, as a result and an outcome of circumcising the child remains circumcised. Is agemalta. This is something which remains in the person constantly. Memele, this is an inyan of a pe'ula nimsheches. It's an ongoing act. That's how we have the mitzvah of Mila. It's not just something which takes place on a person when he's an infant of 8 days, and does not leave its effect later. Being that there is the other half of it, that the person remains circumcised. Memele, it is a pe'ula nimsheches. It is a constant act of a mitzvah. So that is why we can understand that when David realized that he is circumcised, this brought him joy, this brought him simcha, to such an extent that he expressed himself, Soso noichi al imrasecha k'moitzei shalom. I'm going to explain there are various mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs, for example, the mitzvah of making Kiddush on Shabbos. So what is the mitzvah of Kiddush on Shabbos? We make Kiddush Friday night, so this permits a person to be able to eat and drink throughout the entire Friday night. We cannot refer to such a mitzvah as a pe'ula nimsheches. It's not an ongoing mitzvah, it's not a constant mitzvah. It's a mitzvah which is done in its time. However, there are other mitzvahs which can be referred to as a pe'ula nimsheches. It's a constantly ongoing effect of the mitzvah is going on constantly, and therefore it is constantly considered as if he would be doing the mitzvah. And the same regarding mitzvahs Mila b'negei David HaMelech. The inyan of Mila, the Rebbe continued, is something which is an expression of a bris, of a covenant between the Rebishter and Yid. Something eternal, and something bifsarchem in the person's body, a sign which is not only remains in ruchni spiritually, but it's something which is there begashmis. And it expresses a bris between the Rebishter and Yidden. Here the Rebbe brought in the inyan of Hakel, that this year is a year of Hakel. And what is the idea of Hakel? The idea of Hakel is also to strengthen the relationship between the Rebishter and Yidden. What is Hakel all about? Hakel is made liyiras Hashem Elokecha. It affects all of Klal Yisrael, and what What goal? What is the idea of Hakel? Liyiras Hashem Lech Lecha, to introduce God-fearing, to introduce Yira Shemayim by each and every Yid, and tie him together with the Eibishter. So to a degree, the Inyan of Hakel is also like an Inyan of Krisas Bris. Talking here about the Inyan of Hakel, and after finishing to talk about the Inyan of this Inyan here, the Inyan of David HaMelech explaining the Inyan of Bris, the Rebbe said that he's expressing a thanks to all those that have seen it appropriate to be here for Hakel. To be here in these Daled Ames, and this Beis HaMedrash, which as the Rebbe keeps on referring to it, it's the Beis HaMedrash of the Friedeke Rebbe, the Daled Ames of Nesidei Reinu. And he's very much appreciating all those men and women, everyone that came and was here for Hakel, whether they were here for a longer time or a shorter time, but the mere fact that they saw it important to come and be here and participate here in Hakel. And on the other hand, the Rebbe criticized those that did not come here and were away in their own places and didn't come here during Hakel, not even for a day or not even for 2 days or for 3 days, earlier or later. Only Eitzah is, as it is brought regarding Tshuva, Kiflayim l'Toshiyah. Let them be here double the amount, and this would correct it. It was the Rebbe expressed really appreciated all the Orchim that came here, some that stood longer, some that stood shorter, but the mere fact that they saw it appropriate that for Hakel they have to be here, and not like those that for whatever reason remained in their homes and remained in their own Daled Ames and did not join us here all together to participate in Hakel. Talking about all of these inyanim, the Rebbe led into another inyan. Just like we find B'negei Yaakov Avinu, that Yaakov, before he went down to Mitzrayim, Pasuk tells us, Ves Yehuda sholach lefonav goishna, that before Yaakov and his family went to settle in Mitzrayim, they sent Yehuda. And Rashi comments, for what reason did he send Yehuda? Yehuda went down to open a yeshiva first, so that when Yaakov and his family will arrive, they will have where to learn. The children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of Yaakov's family will all have a cheder, will all have a makim Torah where to study. But this is being that we keep on stressing the importance of Giyula. As he spoke earlier in the Sikha, Rebbe mentioned an expression that the building of the first Beis HaMikdash, the Rebbe said, took 7 years. This is how long it took Pashut physically to put up the structure of the first Beis HaMikdash. Regarding the second Beis HaMikdash, the Rebbe said it took yet longer. Regarding the third Beis HaMikdash, it's taking too long. And that is why Yidden are constantly begging Ad Mosai, throughout all the generations, we are begging from the Rebbeinu Shalom, how much longer will we be in Golus? And as we know that the Beis HaMikdash is already built. The third Beis HaMikdash is already built. It's built by the Eibishter. Mikdash Adne Koininu Yedecha. The only thing is, time has to come that it has to be revealed. The Eibishter has to reveal it. And here the Rebbe brought in the Medrash that the Eibishter expressed an oath, a shvuah, Nishba Kodesh Baruch Hu. Eibishter expressed a shvuah that he will not enter Yerushalayim Shel Maila, the heavenly Yerushalayim, until he is able to enter in the Yerushalayim Shel Mata, the material Yerushalayim, the Gashmisdik Yerushalayim, meaning into the Beis HaMikdash. So what we're waiting for is really the Geula Asidah, that Mashiach should come and the Beis HaMikdash should be revealed, and this is what we're waiting for constantly. But similar to what the act of Yaakov, of Es Yehuda Sholach Lefanav, the Sefer Torah, which was completed here last Friday. And this Sefer Torah was sent to Eretz Yisrael. Sunday the Sefer Torah went back to Eretz Yisrael. So the Rebbe said it's an interesting thing. Originally the plan of the Sefer Torah was that it should have been finished and completed on Chofov. And for some reason it was extended. And then it was brought here. As the Sefer Torah was brought here, it wasn't complete yet. And it wasn't a complete Sefer Torah because the Siyum was here. And it was sewn together here. Sefer Torah could be written in parts also. And it was sewn together to be united into one Sefer Torah. And the Siyum was here. Dafke in these Daladamas, the Daladamas of this Beis HaMedrash, and it was after the entire Tishrei, and Sefer Torah was sent back to Eretz Yisrael because originally it was written for Eretz Yisrael. So this Sefer Torah, the Rebbe says, this is the Yehuda Sholach Lafan of Goishna. This is what was sent already as a hakdama to the coming of all of us to Eretz Yisrael. Talking about all of these inyanim, the Rebbe said there's another inyan which he would like to touch. Excuse me, though he already mentioned it at previous times, this is regarding the fact of the correspondence that's reaching him, the mail that's reaching to the Rebbe. The Rebbe says normally there's a chazakah, we take for granted, that if somebody mails a letter, especially when you mail it through mail, through the post, based on Dina de Malchusa, on the rules and regulations of government, these letters reach their destination. The mail of the letters that are sent to him reach their destination. However, it is physically impossible to respond to everyone on their letters. What he does with them, the Rebbe says, is he tries to make sure that all of these letters reach to the oil of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And we know what, use the expression of the Zohar, which is brought in Igeras HaKodesh, Tzadika di spater mahayalma, when a tzaddik is nifta from this world, physically nifta from this world, ishtakach bo yatir mi bechayeyu, he has more shaykhs to the world, even more when he was than when he was alive, because there are no gashmiistic limitations, memela. He's taking care of tzoin marisoi, meaning his followers. He's giving them the fullest attention. As the Rebbe expressed himself, that the one who is the position of a gabbai, in charge to make sure, a gabbai elected by more than 3 people, to make sure that these letters that are written, all, in other words, obviously Rebbe was referring to himself, how he is acting as an intermediary, this is how the Rebbe portrayed it, to make sure that all these letters and the brachas and the bakoshes, whatever people are asking for, all reach to the oil of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Rebbe again stressed very strongly that the reason he doesn't answer should be taken in the proper sense, that it's physically impossible for him to answer to all of them, but he's just trying that in a regular way of, as the letters come in, and if whatever comes in first goes first, and whatever comes in later goes later, to make sure that all of these linyanim are brought to the yoel. We are happy and satisfied that we write it into the Rebbe. Whatever the Rebbe seems appropriate to do with it, that's his inyanim, it's not our inyan. As it's customary in the Farbrengen that the Rebbe refers to a Rambam, as well as a Rashi in the week Sedre, and a Rambam in the Shia Rambam. In this week's Sedre, the Rebbe discussed 2 Rashis in the Sedre. One is at the beginning of the Sedre, where the Pasuk talks about Avram, and the Pasuk says, that is in Kapitel Yud Beis, Pasuk Ches, Vayet Oholoi, and where did he build his tent? The Pasuk describes exactly where Avram built his tent. Oholoi, his tent, would really be spelled Aleph Hey Lamed Vav, Oholoi. However, the Torah here spells it Oholo. We read Oholoi, but it's spelled with a Hey, which could also be read Oholo, her tent. So Rashi explains, what does it mean? Oholo Ksiv. The Ksiv, we know in the Torah there's a Kri and there's a Ksiv. There's the way we read the word and the way the word is written. It is written in a way that it could be read Oholo. We know the Messiah to read Oholoi. What is Oholo, or her tent? So Rashi tells us, B'tchila nota es oyel ishtay, v'achar kach es sheloi. First he prepared the tent for his wife, and then he prepared a tent for himself. Obviously, there's a Gemara. The Gemara that says that a person is supposed to treat his wife to the sense of mechabda yoiser migufay. He's supposed to honor her more than he honors himself. Based on that, obviously, when it came to provide the needs of setting up a tent, first Avram worried to set up the tent for his wife, and then he went ahead and set up his tent for himself. But the child who's learning this Chumash is not aware of this Gemara. He doesn't know that there's a Gemara of Mechabda Yoiser Megufa. So how do we explain to the child who's learning this pasuk, the Ben Chamesh Lemikcha, how do we explain to him that he should understand why was it that Avram first built the tent of his wife and then he built his own tent? So the Rebbe explained it. When a child is being raised in a house, a child knows, for example, that you're not allowed to take a penny, a cent that belongs to somebody else. So how does the child know it? Is it that the father takes the child and shows him the Rambam, and shows him the Beis Yosef, the Halil Shulchan Aruch? He says, here it is brought in Shulchan Aruch and it's brought in the Rambam, all based on a pasuk of Lo Signoi, that you should not steal. This is not the way a child becomes familiar with not stealing. Or the same way, how does a child become familiar with the halachas of Shabbos? It's not that the father sits down with a 5 or 6 year old child and takes out a Shulchan Aruch and teaches him the halachas from its original source, that this you are allowed to do on Shabbos, this you are not allowed to do on Shabbos. It is not that way. But how is it? A child that is being raised in a proper home, in a proper environment, so the child already knows the atmosphere in the house is such that the child is well aware that a cent which is not his, something that belongs to his friend, something that belongs to somebody else, you're not allowed to touch. How does the child know this? This he gets from the chinuch which is given in the house. The same way, how does a child know which halachas, what you are allowed to do on Shabbos, what you're not allowed to do on Shabbos? A child picks up all of these things from the atmosphere in the house, from the practice in the house, the way the house feels it, the way the house is conducted. This in itself is a chinuch to the child, so the child knows how to react on similar cases. The same here. A child, the Rebbe continues, is well aware in the house and sees that there are inyanim that have a shaychus to the father, and there are inyanim that have a shaychus to the mother. This is how it is in every household. In fact, let me explain, nowadays, or even when Rashi wrote his Pirush, there was no such thing as the father's tent and the mother's tent. Now what does it mean? It means there are the inyanim in the house, these things in the house which the father is in charge of, and there are inyanim in the house which the mother is in charge of. For example, a child knows that it's the obligation of the father to make Kiddush, and make Kiddush, and make Havdalah, and Memela. This is something which is done in the father's department. There are other inyanim which are done in the mother's department. Memela, the Rebbe concludes, it's not a kasha. How does the child know that he went and set the tent for his wife first, and later he set the tent for himself? And we're tying it in with the Gemara of Mechabda Yoiser Megufoy. The child is not aware of the Gemara. The child sees what's going on at home. Memela, this child as well sees the attitude that's going on between father and mother, and as home as well, in the home as well. So by seeing that and by absorbing all this, the child can understand that Nota Soyelishtoy, first he took care of the needs of his wife, and then he took care of the needs of Shaloi. Another pasuk which the Rebbe learned is regarding Eliezer. Eliezer, the Eved Avraham, and that is in Kapitel Yud Dalet, pasuk Yud Dalet. There's the war that's going on between the Melachim, between the kings, the 4 kings and the 5 kings. And here Avram is getting involved. Why is he getting involved? Because he wants to save Lot and his family. So the pasuk tells us in pasuk Yud Dalet, Vayishma Avram ki nishba achiv, when Avram heard that his nephew was captured, Vayorak es chanicha v'yilidei beisa, he went ahead and he put together a little army. An army. What does the pasuk say? Shmoina also shloish meyos. He had an army 318. In Gematria, if we were to take the spelling of Aleph Lamed Yud Ayin Zayin Reish, it totals 318. The Rebbe says this is a very strange pshat in Rashi. And we see Rashi doesn't bring it as a pshat in Pshut Shel Mikra. Rashi brings it with the introduction of Rabbi Seinu Amru. In other words, on his own Rashi can't say it. What's giving Rashi the courage to say it? Because Rabbi Seinu Amru. But let us understand the Psukim. Psukim keep on talking about 318 people. And Vayecholek Aleim Laila. And they ran after them. Pasuk is not talking in a singular expression. The Pasuk keeps on talking in a plural expression. And we get the impression that there was a whole group of people. Why do we say, what does Rashi say? You should know it's not 318 people. It wasn't a whole group, a whole camp that Avram got involved with, helping him. Who was helping him? Only one person. Who was the person? Eliezer. Bichlal, Rabbi continues, regarding Eliezer, we see that he must have been somebody very special. Why? Because when Avram was begging from the Rebishter, the Rebishter should give him children, he expressed himself, if the Rebishter does not give him children, then Meshek Beisi, he was referring to his servant, Eliezer, will be the one that will inherit him. In other words, he was at a level of being able to inherit Avram Avinu. He wasn't stam a servant. He was a person of a high spiritual level. Here the Pasuk is talking about a nes which has taken place, how Avram was able to save Lot, to save his nephew, Lot and his family. So really, who was the person in charge of this whole act which is going on here? Who was really planning everything? It is Avram. The head of this operation here is Avram. But it seems the way the Rebbe is learning, it was Avram who was the head of it. Avram was planning the strategy, how to go ahead and save the life of Lot. However, who was with him to the extent of his right hand that was helping him? That was Eliezer. In other words, the Pasha, the Pshat, and the Pasuk still remains that 318 people went along. Rashi doesn't say it as a Pshat of the Pasuk. Rashi says, Rabbi Seinu Amru. Rashi had some sort of a Messiah. It was related from our Rabbi. A Messiah, meaning it was related generation from generation, a tradition. That who was the person who really helped Avram to see to it that this rescue of Lot shall come about successful, that was Eliezer. So in the Pashat of Pshat, it remains as the Pasuk says that it was 318 people. However, Rabbi Seinu Amru, who was the one that Vayorek es Chanicha Yelidei Beisai, the one that really led to it. In other words, the final punchline in saving the life of Lot, as Avram had planned. Avram stood at the head of this whole thing. But who was really the one that helped him? That was Eliezer. The halacha in Rambam, which the Rebbe learned today, is a halacha in Hilchis Mechir, and the halachas of sales. And in this halacha, in Perek Daled, in the fourth Perek, the Rambam tells us, Kelev shel Adam, if a person owns a keli, a dish, a vessel, Kol Mokoim sheyesh lo reshus lahanichoi, any place where he only has permission to put it, Konaloi. It's a kinyan. And imagine if something should fall into this keli, imagine a big pot. If the pot is, once the pot is his, something falls into the pot, it becomes his as well. Because the kela of a person can be koine for him, can acquire from him, can make a kinyan for him, so that what comes into the kela belongs to the owner of the kela. The Rambam continues, where is this applicable? Not in a Rishus HaRabim. A Rishus HaRabim, which is a public area, there we cannot say that. If we want to have that it should be a kinyan for him, that he should be at kaina, it has to be in an area which can be identified somehow as a private area. As the Rambam later uses the expression a simta. A simta would mean an alley in our translation. However, it should happen in Rishus HaRabim. In Rishus HaRabim it can't be kaina for him. Why? Because it's Rishus HaRabim. Rebbe says in all in Yonim, we have as the halacha is in Gashmias, and then we have the spiritual interpretation of the halacha. Especially as the Rebbe always stresses, I mentioned it today as well, there's an expression in the Rambam in Hilchos Tmura, that mitzvahs are given liyasher es hadeyos. The whole idea of mitzvahs is to straighten out our thinking, to straighten out our mind. What is the spiritual moral which we have in this halacha? The Rebbe says every yid is a keli of the Rebishter. A keli. We are vessels which the Rebishter has created. And it is the obligation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to see to it that things come into our area, to our domain, and we are kind of these things. These things become ours. Was made us. Very simple, the Rebbe says. A Yid who was created by the Rebishter is worthy of having all the best, having an abundance in Gashmias, and having whatever he needs and all his needs. And all his Gashmis that can need should be satisfied by the Rebishter. Memela, we are told that there is a halacha, that if once there is a keli standing in a place, anything that comes into the keli, anything that falls into the keli belongs to the keli. Memela, it's the Rebishter's obligation to see, to put inyanim into the keli, so that it should belong to the keli meaning the person in this sense, so that we should have all our needs. However, we're not in Rishus HaRabim. What is the Indian of Rishus HaRabim? Rishus HaRabim is a public area. What is Rishus HaYochid? Chassidus stresses the difference between a public area and a private area. So Chassidus teaches the Indian of Rishus HaYochid means it's an area ready for Yechida Shalaylam, for the one and only, for the Rabbeinu Shalaylam. Rabbi says that is why the Rambam says, where is this halacha effective? Not in Rishus HaRabim, in a public place. Public place is an expression, Chassidus uses the expression Ture de Proide. There is room for everyone, for Kedusha and for the contrary of Kedusha. This is not why a Yid came down into this world. Here the Rebbe tied it into another meaning. Rebbe says we've been talking all along in Sukkot the importance of dancing in the streets. In Rishus HaRabim. Rebbe says what's the Indian behind it? Rebbe says very simple. When we dance in the streets in the Rishus HaRabim, and the Rishus HaRabim is closed off by the police, that they do not let cars go through traffic as cars would usually pass in this Rishus. This, al pi halacha, changes the status of the street, that the street is no longer a Rishus HaRabim. And the street becomes, like we would call it here, a simta, an alley. What does this mean spiritually? Because we keep on stressing all of this during every Farbrengen and Sukkot, every time we talk on Sukkot, that the goal of a Yid has to be to convert to Rishus HaRabim. That Rishus HaRabim should no longer remain Rishus HaRabim, a public area where there is room for everyone, for Kedusha and for the contrary, but should become a Rishus HaYochid, meaning where the message of Yechidei Shalaylam, the singular in the world, who is that the Rabbeinu Shalaylam, he is felt there, and it is noticeable that it is under the jurisdiction of the Rabbeinu Shalaylam. And this is expressed strongly when the Rishus, when the area in Gashmias also becomes such that it is no longer Rishus HaRabim, but it becomes either a Simta or Rishus HaYochid, but it is taken out of the status of Rishus HaRabim. Rabim is an indication, many. In other words, as Chassidus stresses, Tura de Proide, there is room for everybody, for pirut, for separation. It does not express the union of achdus, of unity. Once it is no longer Rishus HaRabim, that is when it can be felt that the Rishus HaRabim was converted. This area, which before it was a Rishus HaRabim. But the dancing of a Yid in the street on Simchas Beis HaSheva accomplishes that it no longer becomes a Rishus HaRabim. Rabbi concluded the Farbrengen that now we're going to begin reading Vayera. So there's the famous story. What does Vayera mean? Vayera Elav Hashem, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to him. So there's the famous story of the Tzemach Tzedek, when the Tzemach Tzedek was a child. And it was Parshas Vayera. And he was told by his Rebbe in Cheder what the contents of the Parsha is. He came into his grandfather, to the Zayda, the Alter Rebbe, and he was crying. So the Alter Rebbe asked him, "Was weinst du? Why are you crying?" So he said, very simple. I'm crying why the Rebishter revealed himself to Avram Avinu, and the Rebishter does not reveal himself to me. This was a feeling of a little child. Child may have been anywhere 4 or 5 years old. And this is why he was crying on Parshas Vayera. So the Rebbe concluded, let the Rebbe help, that we should be Zeiche, may we merit the revelation of godliness, that it should be Vayera Elav Hashem, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should reveal himself to each and every Yid, but not through tears, not because we are crying for that, but on the contrary, through Simcha, through serving the Rebbe with Simcha. And this is what the Rebbe wants. This should bring about by the Rebbe in return, that Vayera Elav Hashem, that the Rebbe soll sich beweisen, should reveal himself to each and every Yid mit euch Simcha. A gute Woche.
What is also no good? Is that until